Hello, this is James Kelly with response video number 3. For these last 2 weeks, we've gone over chapter 7 and 8, so that's what we'll be doing. At the beginning of chapter 7, we are back in the early 18th century, where natives were forced off their lands by treaties imposed by the U.S. government. This process escalated in 1830 with the Indian Removal Act, which made tribes give up millions of acres. By 1826, the Erie Canal opened and connected native lands to new markets. As settlers moved in, they cleared forests and destroyed native hunting grounds. As native lands were turned into farms and plantations, these areas contributed to trade in Europe and Asia. With Europe and Asia. European settlers created myths justifying their actions, viewing themselves as natural caretakers of their land. This story erased the reality of violence against natives people and justified their forced removal as parts of civilizing the land. I never understood this. I felt like in my reaction to this, I don't really get how that works because I feel like people still had a conscience, hopefully back then, unless maybe like the way they were raised was in such a way that they just don't have a conscience for these people. I just always felt that like natives or the people that were doing such these horrible things, these natives. I'm always surprised that like nobody really was like, oh my god, maybe we shouldn't do this. But okay, then U.S. leaders had different ideas on how to handle Native Americans. Some wanted to remove them by force, while others thought assimilation was the answer. During this period, Native nations maintained strong alliances with European countries like Britain to resist U.S. expansion. At the same time, slave revolts and conflicts with Native groups shaped U.S. foreign policy and led to early treaties to settle land disputes. Treaties with the native nations became a tool for the U.S. government to control land and assert its power. One such as Jay's Treaty with Britain in 1794 weakened native alliances with European powers. The Treaty of or such as the Treaty of Greenville a year later, forced the native tribes to give up much of Ohio to the U.S., creating a rule that native lands could only be sold to the U.S. government. Later, the Louisiana Purchase expanded U.S. territory and government control while reinforcing the idea that only white people were full citizens. This land expansion guaranteed the spread of slavery into new territories. Southern native lands were seized and converted into cotton plantations, fueling the growth of slavery. Although some native communities resisted, others adopted parts of European culture, including owning slaves. Georgia challenged native land rights, leading to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Two major Supreme Court cases followed: Cherokee Nation v. Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia, which defined tribes as domestic, dependent nations with limited rights to govern themselves. That was about the end of chapter 7. Now we get into chapter 8. After the 1846 to 1848 war with Mexico, the U.S. gained California and New Mexico, areas where Native people had lived with some independence. In California, settlers used violence and seized Native lands. Then we jump back to Spanish rule, where Native populations faced violence, disease, and exploitation through missions that offered limited sanctuary. In 1785, the indigenous leader Nicolas Jose led an uprising against Spanish abuses. By 1800, the mission system disrupted indigenous communities through groups like the Chumash maintained trade. Through groups like the Chumash that maintained trade. With new ports in California, traders in Spain, Russia, and the U.S. reshaped the economy. Before Spanish colonization, California was one of the most linguistically diverse regions. However, colonization increased tensions amongst indigenous groups. In 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition began surveying the Northwest, relying on indigenous support. In the Northwest, Native leaders focused on trade instead of colonization. However, European trade led to violence, resource depletion, and the spread of diseases like syphilis and smallpox, which, of course, devastated populations. During the Mexican War on Independence, U.S. expansion into the Western territories reignited debates over slavery. The Monroe Doctrine later asserted the U.S. control over North America. U.S. expansion first targeted East Texas and West Florida, leading to the Seminole War against Spain, Great Britain, Native nations, and free black communities. The Adams Onus Treaty of 1819 transferred Florida to the U.S., setting a border with Spanish territory. By 1823, the Monroe Doctrine opposed European colonization in the Americas. That same year, the Supreme Court ruled in Johnson v. McIntosh that only the U.S. government could acquire land from Native nations, establishing federal control of native lands. And that's pretty much it for Chapter 8. Thank you for watching. Oh, wow, that camera angle is horrible. Whatever.